we've got f of x. Don't be scared. It's just a name, just like Maddie's name is Maddie. This function's name is f. That's the name. And its input is x. That's the input. So we've got a few questions to answer. How to say it? We say f of x. That's how we say it. It's not f times x, because what you're saying is when we input x, what do we get out? F of x, the function of x. What is the f? The f is just the name. Just like the name of our other function is the nuggetizer. Just like my name is Mrs. Brandt. Which part represents the input? What is the input for f of x? X. And the output is actually f of x. So whatever I get when I input x, that's my output. So we say, this is my output. You could kind of think about it, this is just a fancy way to write y, but really it's more than that. It's the output of the function. Input. So input and output, what's the first thing we talked about with inputs and outputs? What's the first name that we have for it? Domain is x. Domain is input. And what's the outputs? Range. Okay. What else do we say? So the independent variable and dependent variable. Very first thing, Charlie? X and y. And today we're talking about x and f of x. So again, notice that f of x is basically just a different way to write y. It's just saying if I input x, I get out f of x. It says let f of t be the outside temperature in degrees Fahrenheit, t hours after 6 a.m. Now, why they pick t to represent hours, I understand because it's time, but really couldn't we put h? That's my complaint. I should have changed it, but it didn't. So t is hours. Okay? Explain the meaning of each statement. So let's explain. It says f of t. But really, you know that to mean, what does t stand for? Hours. So really what we're doing is we're inputting the amount of hours, and we're saying we get out a temperature. So my input is the hours, my output is the temperature. If I input 0 hours, my temperature is 58 degrees. That's what that says. So it says at 0 hours, the temperature, I'll say temp and abbreviate because I don't want to write the whole thing, is 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Look at the next one. What are we inputting? It says f of x. So f of 6. 6 what? 6 hours. So when at 6 hours, we do not know the temperature, so we're going to say at 6 hours the temperature is, what does it say is equal to? N is equal to n degrees. Can't write today. The temp is n degrees Fahrenheit. Because we don't know what it is. The temp at 3 hours is less than the temp at 9 hours. Because remember, f of x or f of t is the output. So these are outputs. You are inputting 3 and 9. I love function notation because we have functions all around us. You input gas in a car and you output the car going, or how many miles it goes. When we want x to be a specific value, we replace it in the function notation. So instead of putting x, we're going to put the number we're told x is equal to. Use the function f of x is equal to negative 4x plus 7. Evaluate means or do order of operations. So plug in for x and see what you get. Evaluate f of x when x is equal to negative 3. So I know that my function is f of x is equal to negative 4x plus 7. The name of it is f. The input is x. The output is whatever I get when I do negative 4x plus 7, which is equal to f of x. So if I want to input negative 3, then I say f of negative 3. It's saying I'm going to put negative 3 into this equation. That is not saying, hey, do f times negative 3. That's not multiplication. What you're going to do is replace it over here, which we've done before. It's just kind of like a fancy way to write it. If you input negative 3, we got to figure out what we output. Order of operations says do that multiplication first. Negative 4 times negative 3 would give me positive 12. So positive 12 plus 7, which is 12 plus 7? 19. So my answer is f of negative 3 is equal to 19. When I input negative 3, I output a 19. That's all. So again, our function is, so f of x, let's write it down, is equal to negative 4x plus 7. It says to evaluate f of 5. So that means I'm going to put 5 and replace it where the x is. So f of 5 is equal to negative 4 times 5 plus 7. If I input 5, what is negative 4 times positive 5? Negative 20. So negative 20 plus 7, negative 13. So when I input 5, I output negative 13. That's your final answer. When I input 0, I output 7 because 0 plus 7 is 7. F of 0 is equal to 7. Write your final answer like that. Get in the habit of it. All it's saying is when you input 0, you output a 7. F of x is equal to 6x plus 9, and f of x is equal to 21. You were given the output. That's what this is. Because f of x is the output, so I take 21 and I put it in the f of x spot. 21 is equal to 6x plus 9. And then we know how to solve that. We add or subtract first, so subtract the 9. And we get 12. And I see multiplication, so I divide. So 2 is equal to x. That's a good answer, but it's not your final answer because you need to write it in function notation. F of what? What's my input?
2.
2. When I input a 2, I output a 21. What's the name of this function? G. Oh. It really is a shame. We could name him like Sam or Susie or something. In the future, we should do that. Because it really doesn't matter what you name them. G is fine, though. G of x is equal to negative 1/2 x plus 3. And then g of x is equal to negative 1. Where do I put that negative 1? Do I put it in for x? Or if in for g of x?
G of x.
G of x. It says g of x is equal to negative 1. So you put it in that spot.
So it would be
Negative 1 equal to
negative 1 half
x.
x plus 3.
Yep. And we solved that equation.
Ooh.
So still we add or subtract first. So we're going to
3.
subtract 3 first. And we get negative 4 equals negative 1/2 x. Now, does anybody remember how we get rid of a fraction? Lexi, you remember? By what? Oh, flip it and multiply. Do you remember the name of that? Ryan? Reciprocal. So we're going to flip it. So it would be 2 over 1, negative 2 over 1, which would be just negative 2. So if we multiply by negative 2 on both sides, then we get negative 8. No, positive 8. You're right. Positive 8 is equal to x.
But that's not the final.
No, it's not. So we need to write it in function notation.
So it would be f 8 is equal to negative 1.
G of, you're right, G of 8 is equal to, my output is? Negative 1. That's your final answer. When you input an 8, you output a negative 1. So let's have your table. It's x, and do I put y? What's my output? F of x. The name is f, the output is actually the whole thing, f of x. I want our inputs, let's make them negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, and 1. Normally I would say go from negative 2 to 2, but 2 won't fit on the graph. I tried it earlier. So we're going to start with negative 3. And what you're going to do is the same thing we just did. We're going to input the x value, so f of negative 3 would be equal to 2 times negative 3 plus 5, which is negative 6 plus 5, which is negative 1. And you do that for all 4. And then you can graph those points. So I would graph the point negative 3, negative 1, left 3, down 1. You should get 1, 3, 5, and 7. If you didn't, then check your negatives. Check your multiplication with negatives and see if there's an error there. This is correct though because it's a slope of 2. If you remember slope, it's going up 2 every time. So my points, negative 2, 1, left 2, up 1, 0, 5, no, negative 1, 3, 0, 5, and 1, 7. This is a regular linear, and so we're just going to connect the dots. Try and make a straight line. And you're good.